Welcome. Today we're going to learn how to divide polynomials using long division. Long division, very similar to what you learned in elementary school. So if you don't remember that, maybe ask me in class to go over long division from elementary school. But I'm just going to start right out. And what you would do is you take the polynomial that you're dividing into. This is our divisor, but I'm dividing this polynomial by that one. So I'm going to take this negative 3c squared minus 17c plus 14, and I'm going to put it underneath a long division symbol. And I'm going to put the c plus 6 to the left of it, out front to the left, right? And then what we're going to do is, when we do this, I'm going to keep all the terms lined up. And what I mean the terms lined up, there's a c squared, there's a c to the 1 power, and there's a term with no c. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to first decide what do I need to multiply this first term in my divisor, because there's two terms. That's one thing I want to emphasize. There's two terms in the divisor, but you want to focus on the first one initially and say, I need to multiply this c by something to get it to be a negative 3c squared. So in order to do that, it's missing a coefficient of negative 3. So I need to multiply this c by a negative 3, and I need another c. I need a c squared where I only have a c, so I'm going to do a negative 3c. So if you'll notice, I lined up this term that has a single c with this term. It just helps keep everything lined up. But that's what I would multiply the c by. That's not what I put underneath. Remember, long division now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to multiply this negative 3c by the c, and I'm going to write that underneath the term it goes under, because a negative 3c times c is a negative 3c squared. But now again, our divisor has two terms, a second term, so I need to remember to multiply this by that. It's like distributing. I got to multiply the first term and the second term by this negative 3c. So when I multiply the negative 3c by the 6, underneath the 17, I'm actually going to write a negative 18c, because negative 3 times 6 is a negative 18, and then there's the c. Now in elementary, we learn to draw a line. Now, with polynomials, I recommend you put parentheses around it and you put a subtraction symbol out front to help you remember you're subtracting, because the sign issues are the biggest problem. You're going to take a negative 17 and minus a minus at some point. But let's first start with the first term. If you have a negative 3c squared and you minus a negative 3c squared, they cancel. And that's how you know you got the right factor up here, is that those first two terms should cancel. But we got to progress through the polynomial. So now I take the negative 17c and I minus a minus 18c, or I plus 18 to the negative 17. I'm left with a single c. Now I'm going to drop the next term down. So I'm going to drop down that positive 14, remembering to put the plus symbol in the 14. So we always end up doing two terms and then a subtraction. Now I have two terms. I'm going to repeat the process. I'm going to ask, what do I need to multiply this leading term of c by to get it to be a c? And it's important we multiply by something, and I'm going to write that up here. What do I multiply c by to get it to be a c? A positive 1, which means I'm going to put a plus 1. If I multiply the c by 1, I get a c, and I write it down underneath. Then I have to remember to multiply that second term. 1 times 6, because I'm distributing in, gives me a positive 6. Now I draw a line, I do my parentheses, and I subtract. The c minus the c cancels, which is what should happen if you've done it correctly. But now when I get to the 14 minus the 6, I'm left with a 8. Now, in elementary school, when we divided numbers, we often had remainders. That's what this is. When you get down to a number that doesn't have any c's as you work your way through it, I can't multiply c by anything to get it to be a single 8. It's always going to have a c. So this is what we call our remainder, which is a remainder of 8. But we don't write it as an R8. What we do is we realize this 8 still has to be divided by the c plus 6. So what I would do for my solution is I would type in this dividend, what we got, the negative 3c plus 1. And then since I have a remainder of 8, I have to add 8 that still needs to be divided by that c plus 6. So we write our remainder as a fraction. This would be our final solution for this problem up here. Let's do another one. Here's a longer one because polynomials can be longer. Again, the first thing you're going to quickly do is write down the 15x cubed minus 109x squared plus 20x plus 54, and you're going to put it underneath a long division. And then you're going to write the x minus 7 in front of it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to keep all the terms lined up. The x cubes lined up, the x squareds lined up, the x's lined up, and the constant lined up. And we're going to start with our leading term, asking ourselves, what do I multiply x by to get it to be a 15x cubed? Well, I need a 15, and I need an x squared, two more x's. So I need to multiply by a 15x squared to get the 15x cubed. Well, what I multiply by is what I put above the divisor, or above that division thing. So above it, I'm going to put that 15x squared. And remember, I lined up the x squared. But now when I actually multiply that by the first term, I get the 15x cubed. When I multiply that now by the second term, because remember, I have to distribute. There's two terms in my divisor. 15x squared times 7 is going to be a negative 105 x squared. Now I have the two terms that I got by multiplying. I'm going to put my line, I'm going to put my parentheses, I'm going to minus. 15x cubed minus 15x cubed cancels. A negative 109 minus a minus 105, or add 105, gives me a negative 4x squared, because we're just minusing the coefficients. Now I drop the next term down, plus 20x. And now I repeat the process. I'm always looking for two polynomials in a subtraction, or a line that I subtract through. I got to get a second binomial here. So I ask myself, what do I multiply x by to get it to be a negative 4x squared? Well, I need a negative, or a minus 4x. Negative 4x times x gives me a negative 4x squared. You notice how I write it down underneath. This is what I multiply that by to get that, which is this expression, because I want them to cancel. But I also must multiply the negative 4x by the negative 7, which gives me a positive 28x. Then I put my line. I do my parentheses, and I subtract. Negative 4x squared minus 4x squared cancels, which it should. 20x minus positive 28x gives me a negative 8x plus 54. And the 54 came by dropping that next term. Now I repeat the process. What do I multiply x by to get it to be a negative 8x? Well, I need a minus 8. Minus 8 times x gives me the negative 8x, and I keep that lined up. And when you get to the end, you know you're basically done. We're not quite there yet, because I got to go to the negative 8 times the negative 7. That gives me a positive 56, right? 8 times 7 is 56. Parentheses, your subtraction line. Subtract the negative 8x, subtract negative 8x, cancels, which it should. 54 minus a positive 56, or 54 minus 56 is negative 2. There's no x's left. This is my remainder. So your final solution then would be this expression minus, because it's a negative, 2 over what it still needs to be divided by, that remainder. That remainder needs to be divided by x minus 2. This is what you would type in. This would be your dividend, what you got when you divide. Now, important thing is that all of these terms line up, that you're adding like terms or subtracting like terms. I'm going to do one more really quickly, because I want to emphasize that if you're missing terms, you have to put them in. You're like, what do you mean put them in? Well, when I go to write this one out, I'm going to go 5x to the 4th. Do I have an x cubed? I don't. So what I do is I put a 0x cubed in. That's not a term. 0 times x cubed, 0. But it's a placeholder for the position as we move through it. Now I do a negative 42x squared, negative 42x squared, minus 9x, and I don't have a constant here. I might, just to help myself with my position, put plus 0. There's nothing that I'm adding on. It's a placeholder. And now I'm going to divide by my x minus 3. Again, we're going to start going 2 terms at a time. Going to work on the first 2 terms, the next 2 terms, the next 2 terms, and the next 2 terms. So starting with the first 2. What do I multiply this leading x by to get it to be a 5x to the 4th? Well, I need a coefficient of 5, and I need an x cubed times the x to get me that 5x to the 4th. And I accidentally put that in the wrong spot. I meant to put it over the cubed. It's nicer to keep all the terms lined up, x cubes lined up, right? But now I need to multiply that by this negative 3. So I get a negative 15x cubed. And now, hopefully, this is going to make sense why I put this 0x cubed in, because I could not have combined this x cubed with the x squared. That's a common mistake students do if they're missing a term, or if the one polynomial is missing that cube term. If you don't put a 0 in there, you might try to add this to this or subtract it, and you can't do that. Because now I'm going to subtract, those 2 leading terms cancel. I don't have any x cubes, but I'm subtracting 15 from that. So well, actually, I'm subtracting a negative. Again, watch your signs. Signs can be very tricky with these. I'm minusing a negative 15, so that ends up being a positive 15x cubed. Now I bring down that next term, which is a negative 4x squared. What do I multiply x by to get it to have a 15 in front and 2 more x's? Well, I'm going to multiply it by a positive 15x squared, because that gives me a 15 times 1 is 15. X squared times the x is my x cubed. Now don't forget the second term. 15x squared times a negative 3 is going to be a negative 45x squared. That I'm subtracting. Put it in parentheses and subtract, because you got to remember you're subtracting this negative. The first 2 cancel. Negative 4x squared minus a minus 45 means I'm adding 45. So that becomes a 41x squared. Bring down that next term, which is a minus 9. Repeat the process. What do I multiply x by to get it to be a 41x squared? Well, I need a 41, and I need another x. So 41 times x is 41x squared. 41x times the negative 3 will be a minus 123x. Whoops, I forgot to bring the x down with the 9. Now I'm going to subtract. The first 2 cancel. Negative 9x minus a minus 123x. Well, that's going to add 123. So it's going to be 1, because it's 123 minus 9, 114x. And again, we had no constant, but I want to remember that I'm going to have a placeholder for it, because now I still can get rid of this 114x because it has an x and I have an x over here. So that goes into this. I apologize, you can't see that. I'm going to move up. So when I minus the minus 9x to the minus 123x, I got a 114x. Then I drop this 0 down, because that's important to have that placeholder, because I can multiply x to still get rid of this 114x. But what would I multiply x by to get it to be 114x? I would multiply it by a positive 114. So 114 times x gives me this 114x. Do not forget to multiply the 114 by that second term in the divisor. 114 times 3 is going to be a very big number. What is that? 342. Yep, 342. So that's going to be, and then by the way, it's a negative 342. Now I'm going to subtract. Again, those first 2 terms cancel, which it should. And then 0 minus a minus is going to be plus 342. This has no x's now. Since this has no x's, this will be my remainder. But remember how we want to write the remainder. We write it as, since it's a positive, I'm going to write it as plus 342 that still needs to be divided by the x minus 3. If you have any questions, please bring them to class.